Bottom. Hi, everyone. I am Debra Young. I am an associate professor of social work with Marshall University's Master of Social Work program. Some of you are familiar with me. Some of you get to see me a lot, like Natasha. One of the things that came out of a conversation, like through email and other things, is making sure that folks are aware of human trafficking and what that entitles. When the article came out last week or so, where Emily was talking about labor trafficking and recovery homes, it kind of sparked a little, maybe we need to have a conversation about this with me, because I am not only a member of the WAVAR board, I'm a member of the People Against Human Trafficking Board of Kentucky. And so I thought we need to bring these two together and have some conversation. So we did that earlier this week, and Emily said, hey, I'm having this call. Maybe you can jump on and talk about human trafficking for a while. And so that's what I'm going to do. This is a presentation that we put together that is about an understanding what human trafficking is, building some knowledge and understanding of it for healthcare professionals. And we say that in the gist of people helping people. We're going to look at it. Can everybody see? Yeah. Through awareness and education. And what just a little bit about PATH in Kentucky is we started around 2013 to bring awareness and education about human trafficking to the people of Kentucky. I'm obviously not a Kentucky resident. I live in Charleston. I work in Charleston and Huntington. But the goal is to bring a coalition like PATH of Kentucky to West Virginia. So I very strategically maneuvered myself to be on those two boards along with the Kanawha Valley Collective, because I think the three of us can work together really well to diminish and eliminate human trafficking in West Virginia. So we want to make sure that people understand the reality of it, what it is, and how to eradicate it. Sorry, I went backward. So our goal is to end human trafficking through education, preventing exploitation, and empowering survivors. And we have lots of things out there. If you just Google PATH of Kentucky, we have a very updated website that can enable you to see what PATH is all about, and how you can start to really think about ways that we can bring some of those services to West Virginia. So today we're going to talk about what human trafficking is and the vulnerability that goes with it, identify red flags of human trafficking and signs of human trafficking, consider the roles of healthcare professionals in both child and adult human trafficking occurrences, and learn a little bit about trauma. I don't want to keep you here all day, and this is something that we could talk about for hours. So I talk really quickly. If you need to ask questions, just ask, and we'll go from there, because I'll go very, very fast and I can repeat myself if needed. One thing that people really don't understand is that human trafficking goes beyond sex work. When you ask a person on the street who's not familiar with what human trafficking is, or what really sometimes human services even is, they'll say, you say human trafficking, they say sex work or sex trafficking. It also is domestic servitude, as well as sex trafficking, forced labor, bonded labor, and child labor. And we also have familial trafficking that's not on here, but that is something that is very, very prevalent in Kentucky, which are parents and guardians trafficking children for labor, domestic servitude, or sex. Sex trafficking as a whole is a big part of the problem, and this is identified as the recruitment, harboring, transportation, provision, or obtaining of a person for a commercial sex act, in which a commercial sex act is induced by force, fraud, or coercion. And those are the three terms you need to remember. If you leave anything today knowing something, you need to know that trafficking is force, fraud, or coercion. And that's when a person is induced to perform an act and they have not attained 18 years of age. So it's moving on. Okay, I lost my train of thought. Labor trafficking is the recruitment, harboring, transportation, provision, or obtaining of a person for labor or services through the use of force, fraud, or coercion for the purpose of subjugation to involuntary servitude, peonage, debt bondage, or slavery. And this is what came up in the article where Emily was quoted and about recovery homes, is using labor trafficking as a way to obtain services. And so we'll get a little bit more into that in just a bit. The Trafficking Victims Protection Act of 2000 was the first comprehensive federal law that addressed human trafficking. So this is something that has been going on for hundreds and hundreds of years, but it's finally on the radar that this is not okay. And so the TVPA addressed existing gaps in the legal framework. They created new criminal offenses and established new victim protections. And so it was a three-pronged approach, which was preventing human trafficking, protecting victims and survivors, and prosecuting those who are trafficking people. In the United States, the definition of a victim is a person induced to perform labor or a commercial sex act through force, fraud, or coercion. And a minor victim is a person under the age of 18 who is, of course, performing these same things. And this is regardless of whether force, fraud, or coercion was used. So child labor, child sex act, regardless of force, fraud, or coercion, because it usually is force, fraud, or coercion when it comes to a child. Some elements that I've been talking force, fraud, coercion over and over and over again that I want you to remember how those are defined. Force is physical assault, sexual assault, confinement kinds of things where they are forced to perform it in order to maintain living a lot of the times. Fraud is false promises about work or living conditions or withholding promised wages. So this would be eliminating a percentage of a person's rent or paying off a debt in order for labor or sex, but then there's always other types of interest or different things that eliminate that debt from ever being diminished or eliminated. Coercion is threats of harm or deportation, debt bondage, psychological manipulation, or confiscation of documents. That's a hard word for me. Emily, we're together today on our word salad. The act of human trafficking, act means purpose. Act is recruiting, transporting, transferring, harboring, or receiving people who are being trafficked. The means to do that is through threat or use of force. Of course, coercion, which we talked about, abduction, fraud, deception, abuse of power or vulnerability, and giving payments or benefits for those services. And the purpose of exploitation includes prostitution of others, sexual exploitation, forced labor, slavery or similar practices, removal of organs, or other types of exploitation. You hear about selling organs or being kidnapped and then waking up without an organ as an urban myth, but it's actually a reality that happens to some folks. If you're familiar with intimate partner violence, you might recognize this graphic. It is also a graphic that is used for trafficking. As you can see, it's the power and control wheel. And we have sex trafficking at the top, labor trafficking at the bottom. And then on the sides, it talks about the different types of trafficking victims that are domestic servants, farm workers, food service providers, prostitutes or sex workers, brothels, massage parlors, kinds of things. If you look through the different types of power and control that are used, they are very similar to intimate partner violence, with things like coercion and threats, intimidation, emotionally abusing the person, isolating them, gaslighting them through minimization and denying or blaming, sexual abuse, privilege abuse, and economic abuse. And economic abuse is a big part of this because this is the heart of human trafficking. It is economics. It is supply and demand. You have a trafficker or a pimp who uses force, fraud, or coercion on a victim, and then you have the customer or the John or the provider who pays for that violence, that rape, that use of that person to fulfill some type of need. And so it very much is a supply and demand economic process that we're hoping to eliminate. People aren't for sale. Excuse me. And here's a little graphic for you that says banned goods made with forced labor. I was talking earlier today in my earlier Zoom meeting about human trafficking with a student, and she said, well, I think it's just sex work. And I'm like, nope, it's more than that. And I realized I have a sweatshirt and yoga pants because I get to present from home. from Old Navy, and both of my tags say made in Vietnam, and I probably am wearing clothing that was made through labor trafficking. And so waking up to realize that all of the goods that we're using, and some things that are even so out there that we don't think about, like chocolate or coffee, or where our furniture is made, or where our vehicles are made, how those things come into our hands, it's a little bit of an awakening if you really take a look at it and figure out that the majority of our goods are made through labor trafficking. Kind of makes you want to change your lifestyle a little bit. Some industries in the United States where active criminal cases of forced labor were opened in 2020. As you can see, the majority is through domestic work. And so that's farm work, hotel services, restaurant services are down here, but this is like maids, housekeeping kinds of stuff. Restaurant and food service was the second. Agriculture, beauty services like massage parlors, nail salons, facial spas, that kind of stuff. Construction, manufacturing, and then other. So where sex trafficking happens in the United States, first and foremost, are hotels and motels, especially if those are the rent by the hour or rent by the week types of hotels. Motels, they can set up a service in a weekly rental type of thing, and you pay for the week. Whatever you do with the room is up to you, kind of mentality. For street prostitution, again, this can be through a pimp, but it can also be from a partner, a husband, a spouse, a boyfriend, girlfriend, that can be forcing their partner into sex work in order to get money or drugs. Pornography production sites, online exploitation, and with children and youth, as I was saying earlier, this familial trafficking is happening through families, schools, youth organizations, neighborhoods, and in our child welfare and justice systems. So it's not just families that traffic children, they can also be trafficked through other organizations as well. The vulnerability to trafficking is shared by all victims. Trauma is shared by all victims, and traffickers identify and leverage their victims' vulnerability in order to create dependency. So the people who are truly most at their most vulnerable are the ones who are susceptible to getting kind of sucked into this. And those are children in the child welfare and juvenile justice system, including foster care, runaway, and homeless youth. So again, as I was saying, when we first started, I'm on this board of WAVAR, I'm on the board of PATH, but I'm also on the board of I'm with the Canal Valley Collective. And so making sure that we get this umbrella of coverage and understanding about human trafficking in West Virginia is something that I'm very, very passionate about. And I'm hoping to bring these three together. Other are unaccompanied foreign national children without lawful immigration status, people who are seeking asylum, Native Americans, Alaska natives, particularly women and girls, and racial or ethnic minorities. Some other vulnerable groups are foreign national domestic workers in diplomatic households. So these are your housekeepers and maids and cooks, people with limited English proficiency, people with disabilities, and for our purposes today, people who have substance use issues. Migrant laborers, including undocumented workers and participants in visa programs for temporary workers, LGBTQ plus individuals, and victims of intimate partner violence or other forms of domestic violence. So if you think about these folks who are listed in these vulnerable groups, these are people who oftentimes are marginalized or oppressed by society. They have a lack of agency in their relationships a lot of the times, or in their workplaces, and they are at the well, they're at risk, but they're also under the power and influence of the agencies or the people or the society in which they're trying to survive. Excuse me. So the traffickers themselves, immediate family is the highest number. And again, this is that familial trafficking where children are trafficked, or partners are trafficked in order to obtain some type of goods or services like sex or money or drugs or bartering kinds of things for living situations or food. Boyfriends in particular, so men trafficking women, 27%, friends of family, 14%, employers, 14%, and strangers are 9%. Unfortunately, strangers are the ones who get the most glamour and media if it's out there, because it's stranger danger and it's scary stuff to think about trafficking rings and things like that. But they, people getting kidnapped off the street. I remember I was going on vacation with my family, and one of my students said, "Where are you going?" And I said, "Oh, we're going to Myrtle Beach." And she said, "Oh, I'm doing all this research for my capstone project and on human trafficking, and Myrtle Beach is one of the highest areas where trafficking happens, with stranger trafficking, like kidnapping your children off the street." And she said, "So be careful with your daughter." So don't worry, I will. But that was a little bit of an awakening for me too. And that was about 10 years ago. So this is not a new problem. It's an existing problem. And it's something that we need to be aware of all the time, because it's happening everywhere. As you can see, it happens in suburbs, rural towns, cities, urban cities. It doesn't matter income. It doesn't matter if it is, your bedroom community where everybody has a neighborhood watch and everybody knows everybody's business and they're on social media and the neighborhood app and all of that. Trafficking still can happen. A lot of the times it's behind closed doors and we don't know it's happening. So what we want you to look at are some things, some red flags when you are seeing new folks come into your agencies, or even if you are working in areas where you're in hotels. Or remember, as healthcare workers or service providers, a lot of the times you're a mandated reporter, and this is something that you need to report. Some red flags that you might see are people who appear to live at their place of employment. So if they're living and working in the same place, and this could be a recovery home, it could be a red flag for labor trafficking. Or they're working excessively long hours in poor conditions. Some blue collar jobs are like that to begin with, but if it's really excessive and it's more than just working hard and working overtime, that could be a red flag. They may be showing signs of physical injury and abuse. They lack official identification documents. They may be destitute or lack personal possessions, meaning that they don't have anything. They may not have really even anywhere to live. They just kind of show up, excuse me, for labor ready or some other types of things. They earn wages below the state's minimum wage or under the table, and they are constantly indebted to their employer. I'm going to mute really quick and call. I'm so sorry. Some red flags of sex trafficking. This is a person who may be dressed inappropriately for the weather, their location, or their age. Keep in mind that these might be very young girls who are dressed very inappropriately. They are in the presence of an overtly controlling or concerned friend or boyfriend, girlfriend. Also keep in mind that this could be a minor with a same-sex person that is presenting as their parent or guardian. So it's not just the older boyfriend or the pimp or friend who's there with them. It could be, a 14-year-old girl with a 20-some-year-old or 30-some-year-old woman who is presenting as their guardian or their older sister or mom that is really their trafficker. Because most traffickers are men, but women are traffickers too. Tattoos and branding on the neck or lower back to indicate ownership. These people are not allowed to go into public alone or speak for themselves. If you are doing an intake and someone else is doing all the talking, that's a red flag. Have an inconsistent or well-rehearsed story about where they live, the relationship with the person they are with, or how they have traveled to the current location. A lot of the times people who are trafficked are taken from where they live or the area in which they're familiar into a different environment in order to work or be sold. So our role as health providers are we're a key part of it in identifying who these people are and what they're going through. And they enter our system because they are in crisis. They are usually in some type of physical or mental health crisis or substance use crisis, but they will hit during their trafficking phases of transportation, detainment, or exploitation. So it could be at any point in their trafficking journey that they enter our system. The Beasley Institute for Health Law and Policy conducted a study that found that nearly 90% of trafficking survivors come into contact with a healthcare professional at some point during their time of being trafficked. So that's a significantly high number of people who are at an opportunity where they could have help. And we look at it from that perspective of how can we be that healthcare provider in that 90% of people that we could help. And when trafficking victims who are in the process of being trafficked go to a hospital or to a clinic to seek medical care, they could be more willing to share their problems and concerns because they're facing some type of medical crisis, in comparison when you're speaking to them outside of a medical context, like on the street or as your neighbor or something along those lines. When it comes to minors, all states require you to report confirmed and suspected child sex or child labor trafficking to local or federal enforcement agencies and child protection agencies. This is West Virginia Code 661.14.2 that says any person who knowingly and willfully traffics a minor is guilty of a felony and upon conviction thereof shall be imprisoned in a state correctional facility for not less than 5 nor more than 20 years, fined not more than $300,000, or both imprisoned and fined. So they do prosecute these folks, but they have to find them first. With HIPAA, it gets a little wonky because we're not supposed to give out private information, and yes, that's what HIPAA is. It's written to protect patient confidentiality, but in social work settings and in human services positions, or what we call social welfare jobs, where we are working to help people, that goes out the window with mandated reporting. And so the HIPAA does not protect from mandated reporting. It was not designed to prevent the reporting of someone in danger or someone committing a crime. And so you are a mandated reporter, and you have to report it when you see these types of things happening, regardless of whatever HIPAA privacy you have within your agency policy. And again, this goes into sharing patient information would violate HIPAA. We all know what mandated reporting is. In West Virginia, if you are a mandated reporter and you do not report child abuse, child neglect, the fine is, I want to say, I'm not going to say because I might get it wrong, but I know that if it's sex crime, child sexual abuse, which would be child sex trafficking, reported and substantiated, is a $10,000 fine and up to 6 months in prison. So it's a pretty significant starting point. And then if it's trafficking, it's even more. So if you have questions about your agency's privacy and confidentiality policy, if it is a HIPAA policy versus a social work kind of consent for treatment situation, just know that regardless of HIPAA rules, federal HIPAA rules, that if you see someone who is being trafficked, if you see someone who is at risk of harming themselves or harming someone else, you are a mandated reporter, and you do need to report it to the appropriate parties, which would be the law, whether that's local law enforcement, federal law enforcement, and or child protective services. Adult protective services in West Virginia covers persons over 65. And yes, those are people who are trafficked and exploited, and people who are 18 and over with intellectual disabilities. And so you may have to report to adult protective services if those people qualify. Again, this is more HIPAA information. Even if you didn't want to, this is saying try to report without giving away everything, but you still have to report it. So when you report red flags and reasonable suspicion for adult, you are not responsible for investigating or confirming cases of human trafficking. Call the hotline if you know the red flag, even if you're not sure. This goes all the way back to a court case of with mandated reporting, which is it's better to have a false call than to ignore a true calling. So I can't remember what that case is, but I talk about it in class. But it's important to recognize that research suggests that healthcare providers are uniquely positioned on the front lines, and you may be the first person that a victim encounters if they're coming into treatment with you. Some health indicators of human trafficking are things like scars, mutilations, infections due to no medical care, poor hygiene, urinary difficulties, pelvic pain, pregnancy, or rectal trauma, disorientation, confusion, phobias, or panic attacks. Those go along with trauma. Cigarette burns, fractures, bruises or contusions, somatic complaints of headache, back pain, dizziness, generalized weakness, pregnancy, tattoos found on the body may serve as a brand that the victim belongs to their trafficker. Evidence of sexual trauma, unexplained scars, bite marks, stab wounds, gunshot wounds, hearing loss from head trauma, sexually transmitted infections or diseases, overdose, intoxication, or withdrawal symptoms, dental trauma, and loss of teeth. If you need to report human trafficking, there is a 1-888 number you can call. You can also text Be Free, excuse me, which is 233-733, or go to humantraffickinghotline.org. Excuse me, this is 24/7 toll free. There are 200 languages available. So there's no reason not to call. If you may have a suspicion, you can talk with someone to go through reporting. You can go through asking for help if you are a victim of trafficking. So when we look at human trafficking from the victim perspective and the trauma that they are experiencing, you have to understand that individuals who have experienced trafficking may have experienced trauma not only from the trafficking exploitation, but over the course of their lives from some of the upstream determinants that make them at risk for trafficking. Remember, these are vulnerable people to begin with. These are people who live in oppressed and vulnerable situations. And a lot of the times, once it gets to the point of trafficking, they have experienced a lot of adverse life experiences and abuse, neglect, and power loss up to that point. So understand that individual trauma results from an event, series of events, or set of circumstances that is experienced by an individual as physically or emotionally harmful or life-threatening, and that has lasting adverse effects on the individual's functioning and mental, physical, social, emotional, or spiritual well-being. So the impact of trauma can happen in a few ways. Of course, first and foremost is post-traumatic stress disorder, and that is identified through recurrent thoughts or reliving the event, recurrent nightmares, having trouble sleeping, feeling detached or withdrawn, easily startled, unable to concentrate, memory disruption that can happen with PTSD, but it can be just an inability to recall traumatic events. It's almost like it's repressed. And then sensory information may trigger memories like certain smells, certain sounds. I don't know if you experience it, but I have scent memory. If I smell something or I hear a song, it'll take me right back to the place where maybe something meaningful happened in my life, but it could also be something that traumatic that happened in someone's life as well. Trauma bonding is what happens when you see this unwillingness to report or testify against the trafficker. They want to return to the trafficker and demonstrate loyalty and concern for that person. This is something that you see a lot with children and women who can't seem to let go. Trauma bonding happens. It's an attachment piece. And again, if we look at all the way back to the beginning of life, these folks have already had attachment trauma, or they wouldn't be, and throughout their lives, they've forged these relationships and these vulnerabilities to get them to that point. And so people who have secure attachment oftentimes have secure lives. And so it's really hard to break a trauma bond once it happens, but it is something that you can work through therapy and other means in order to make sure that this person realizes that they're in an abusive relationship. Some strategies and approaches for caring for trafficking victims and survivors obviously needs to be victim-centered, trauma-informed. We need to look for harm reduction and survivor-informed types of modalities and interventions to make sure that when you are working with someone who has been trafficked or they've survived trafficking, that it is very focused on strength and resiliency, and it's very focused on their experience and changing their narrative. It's not there to blame. It's not there to create fault or identify their acceptance that this happened to me and I played a role in it type of mentality. It must be from a very future forward, survivor informed type of intervention. The victim-centered approach builds trust and rapport. This looks at the victim's wishes, safety, and well-being that takes priority in all matters. So when you're working with them, it is very relation-focused of trust and rapport and being conscious of the way you talk and the language that you use. Safety is the priority. The person needs to have a safe space to tell their story, that their basic needs are being met, and reassurance is part of the process. And make sure that as the provider, you are sensitive to power dynamics. You are not sitting above them, you're not standing over them, that they know that they have an active role, and you take very intentional steps to avoid any type of re-traumatization of telling their story over and over again, talking about their story outside of the therapeutic relationship, kinds of stuff. A trauma-informed approach is mindful of the impact that trauma has on a person. And so it's through the realization that the widespread impact of trauma is lifelong and understands that there are potential paths to recovery. It responds to by fully integrating knowledge about trauma policies into policies, procedure, and practices. And it recognizes signs and symptoms of trauma in all aspects of treatment, in all aspects of the system, and it seeks to actively resist re-traumatization. So you're seeing a little bit of theme here of we don't want people to have to relive this over and over again. We want them to move forward. Because re-traumatization has several different triggers that can take a person right back to that situation they were in and create those both physical and emotional symptoms that it's almost like the concept of we've taken 3 steps forward, now we're taking 5 steps back. It gives them this feeling of lack of control, that experiencing unexpected changes can be a trigger. If they feel like they're being threatened or attacked, they might feel vulnerable or frightened, and they may feel shame about their experiences. So when you're working with someone who has had this type of trauma, it's very important to be cognizant of the language that you use, the way you ask questions, your body language, how you control your face and your reaction to their story, and to make sure that when you're asking questions and when you're providing therapeutic support, that it is couched in a very empathetic, compassionate, and unconditional regard type of mentality. So it's very important to be calm a lot of the times, and not necessarily flat, but just very empathetic, very genuine, and starting where they are with unconditional positive regard, no judgment. Trauma response management. There are some skills and tools you can implement to help individuals manage their trauma responses. Psychological first aid, educating them through psychoeducation, using sensory-based grounding tools. This is a really great way to bring someone back when you start to see them spiral, is to use mindfulness techniques like sensory-based grounding tools of like a 5 senses exercise of tell me 5 things that you see, tell me 4 things that you can hear, kinds of thinking to get them back to start. Self-soothing and relaxation skills are also mindfulness techniques that work. It could be tapping, it could be deep diaphragmatic breathing types of exercises, but ways to help the person calm and recenter. And then active and compassionate listening, including mirroring, empowering language. So making sure that that communication cycle of message, receiver, and then sending it back is all very open, and that you're mirroring and summarizing what the person is saying, especially if they're saying empowering language, and making sure that you're helping couch their language in empowering language. I like hand motions to help me move. Sorry, got a little carried away there. So I'm going to take this to where I can see people if there are any questions. Before that, here's how you know how you can get in touch with PATH. If you want to talk to anyone at PATH, PATH Coalition of Kentucky at gmail.com. Dr. Teresa Hayden seems to have the lead on responding to those emails. She's also a faculty member at Marshall University and professor emeritus of University of Louisville. If you go to our website, pathcoalitionofkentucky.org, you can see who they are and what they're about, and hopefully they may be able to help you or your agency some, and we can get that type of response to West Virginia. So I'm going to stop sharing and let you ask questions if you have it. We lost some people while we were out. That's okay.
So I just want to make sure it's really important to stress to our operators, like you guys are serving trafficking victims and trafficking and traffickers in your homes. Whenever I was in my recovery residence that I graduated from, there was more more women than not in that building that had been sexually exploited in some kind of way. So like you literally are like serving people that have been through these experiences. So it's really important for you guys to do your research and really build some support for folks in your house. I didn't know that I didn't know that I was trafficked even, until somebody put that word with what I went through. So it's so important that you guys have these conversations and these conversations are happening. So not only can healing from substance use disorder happen, but also start the healing from all of the things that we went through during trafficking, whenever we've been trafficked. So
I think that's a really good point, Autumn, is that a lot of the victims and survivors that you all are working with really have no idea that they were trafficked. And so making sure that they're aware that what happened to them was probably not their choice, and to help them kind of let go of some of that self-blame and internalized negativity about their choices and actions is really, really important to survival. It's really important to healing and recovery, because there's so much self-blame that goes with choices and decisions while you're in the recovery process, that being able to let go of some of that and say, you know what, I was forced to do this. I was tricked into this. This part was not on me, is really, really vital, because it can be super empowering to someone to be able to say, okay, it wasn't all me. I can move forward from this. I was a vulnerable person. And thank you for bringing that up. You said it better than me.
one other thing too, I think looking at our paid work agreement, that's a requirement by by us, is a really great way to guide you, just to ensure that that losing sight of not anything outside of that paid work agreement could get a little sketchy. And that's what we're seeing a lot of right now is people having to work is part of a program, but it's work beyond volunteerism, or it's work beyond working, for program fees. So that really looking at paid work agreements are really important to protect your residents, and then also protect yourselves as organizations.
Yeah, I think that's really important. Also, if there is a faith component of that, of making sure that that's not a forced situation, because it's, again, that's how to say it in a diplomatic way. It's not everyone's choice. And so how can invite them, but don't force them to participate and be a part of that. It's because it's not, that message isn't going to get passed through anyway. If someone's forced to be there, they're not listening. So, well, thank you for your time.
I have a question, Dr. Young.
You always have questions, Natasha.
Well,
It's okay.
and
I'm not surprised.
okay. Um, so maybe I heard it wrong, but in the definition of somebody being sex trafficked, it said they were under 18.
No, I saw that too, and I thought it was a little weird. I didn't create this
Okay.
training.
Okay.
No, that's a minor. Any minor under 18 that is, it made no sense to me either. So I think that is something that you can let go of. That because it's any person who is under force, fraud, or coercion to perform a sex act for money or drugs or food or housing, that's trafficking. So again, it's that force, fraud, or coercion. And coercion gets a little gray because it's like, am I really? Because gaslighting becomes a part of that, grooming becomes a part of that. And so that, I think, is what Autumn is talking about, those folks who are coerced into this as a means of getting an end. And they don't even realize it's happening, because when someone is effective at grooming, the victim doesn't realize they're being groomed. And so, but going back to that, I didn't get that either. And you probably realized when I was going through it, I was like, wait, what? So yeah, I was like, no, this is anybody. But if they're under 18, it is always considered to be trafficking, because it's always force, fraud, or coercion, because people under 18 don't have the right to consent, according to, they're not adults. Some
Perfect.
people choose
That
to do
makes
sex work. I think it was that sex work piece, because you can choose to be a sex worker, and
Mhm.
in some states it's legal. It's not legal here, but you can still choose to do sex work to get money if that's what you want. And if you're making that conscious decision and you are monitoring your own income and you don't have someone who's forcing you to do it, only you, um then there's nothing we can do about it. That's a choice, right? But and that gets really, that's a hot topic in human trafficking conversations, which is, should sex work even be on the table with sex trafficking? And yes, it should, because if you have a sex worker who is being forced by a pimp when they don't feel like it, when they are having their period, when they are ill, when they may have some type of STD that is raging, and they are still being forced to go out there and perform and give up their income to someone else, that's trafficking.
So also like self-trafficking, that sex work is also, it's called survival trafficking.
Right.
So that I think it's the form of trafficking, whether there is the trafficker involved or if you're doing
Well,
it
people,
yourself.
that's where the argument gets
Yeah.
in,
Yeah.
right? And we know that there are people who choose to be in sex work because they love the job. It's a great thing. We know this, we're adults, but there are many, many, many people who get into sex work because it is a means of survival. And so that's where the argument really happens between people who work in human trafficking a lot. It's happened on our board. We've had very heated arguments about it, about that in particular. And I will say personally, I 100% agree with you, Autumn, that it is not sometimes a personal choice. It is a survival choice. And you don't feel good about it. You should love your job. So,
Thank you both
thoughts,
so much.
questions? Thanks for sticking around.
Yeah, of course. Does anybody have any other questions or feedback from these two lovely ladies? Okay, I'm gonna go ahead and stop recording.